World Wars, total economies. The age of total war. In the early 20th century, warfare changed forever. No longer were wars fought only by soldiers on distant battlefields. The First and Second World Wars transformed entire nations into engines of conflict, mobilizing factories, farms, finances, science, and civilian life itself. This new reality was known as total war, and at its heart stood the total economy. Every resource, every worker, every invention, and every sacrifice became part of the war effort. This is the story of how the world's greatest conflicts reshaped economies, societies, and governments on an unprecedented scale. Chapter 1. What is a total economy? A total economy emerges when a nation reorganizes all economic activity to serve military victory. Civilian needs are subordinated to war demands. Governments take direct control over production, labor, prices, trade, and resources. Factories stop producing consumer goods and instead manufacture weapons, uniforms, vehicles, and ammunition. Women and children replace men in industrial jobs. Rationing controls food and fuel. Propaganda encourages sacrifice, discipline, and unity. For the first time in history, entire populations became participants in war, whether they wore uniforms or not. Chapter 2. World War I. The first total economy, industrial mobilization. When World War I erupted in 1914, most nations were unprepared for a prolonged industrial conflict. Early optimism quickly collapsed as trenches stretched across Europe and casualties soared. Governments rapidly converted civilian factories into arms producers. Steel mills forged artillery shells instead of railways. Textile factories sewed uniforms instead of fashion. Chemical plants produced explosives and poison gas. Industrial output became as important as battlefield tactics. Labor and society. Millions of men were drafted, creating labor shortages at home. Women entered factories, railways, and offices in unprecedented numbers. In Britain, France, and Germany, women became the backbone of wartime production. Working hours lengthened. Strikes were suppressed. Governments regulated wages and working conditions to ensure uninterrupted output. This shift permanently altered gender roles and expectations across the industrialized world. Financing the war. World War I was enormously expensive. Governments raised money through war bonds, taxation, and massive borrowing. Inflation surged as currencies weakened. Germany, heavily reliant on borrowing, suffered economic collapse by war's end. Britain and France accumulated enormous debts, especially to the United States. Economic exhaustion would shape the unstable peace that followed. Chapter 3. Between the wars, economic lessons learned. The interwar period became a laboratory of economic planning. Nations studied the successes and failures of wartime mobilization. Some governments concluded that state control was essential for survival in modern warfare. Others struggled with unemployment, inflation, and debt, creating fertile ground for radical ideologies. The Great Depression further demonstrated how deeply governments could intervene in economies, experience that would later prove crucial during World War II. Chapter 4. World War II. Total economies at full scale. World War II pushed total economies to their absolute limits. Unprecedented production. The scale of production was staggering. The United States became the arsenal of democracy, producing planes, tanks, ships, and weapons in quantities never imagined. Factories ran 24 hours a day. Assembly lines produced one aircraft every few minutes. Automobile plants were converted to tank and aircraft manufacturing. Germany, the Soviet Union, Britain, and Japan all reorganized their economies around military output. Victory increasingly depended on who could produce more, faster, and cheaper. Government control and planning. Governments exercised near-total control over economic life. They set production quotas, controlled raw materials, fixed prices, and directed labor. In Nazi Germany, the war economy relied heavily on forced labor from occupied territories. In the Soviet Union, centralized planning relocated entire industries eastward to escape German invasion. In Britain, rationing ensured fair distribution of scarce goods. Economic management became a weapon of war. Science, technology, and innovation. Total economies fueled unprecedented technological advancement. Radar, jet engines, rockets, synthetic materials, and nuclear energy all emerged from wartime research. Scientists became strategic assets. Universities, laboratories, and industries collaborated closely with governments. The Manhattan Project alone consumed vast resources, demonstrating how deeply economies could be mobilized for scientific warfare. Chapter 5. Civilians on the economic front line. Civilians bore enormous burdens. Food, fuel, and clothing were rationed. Black markets emerged. Cities were bombed, factories destroyed, and infrastructure shattered. In occupied territories, economies were stripped to feed occupying armies. In total war, economic targets became military targets. The home front was no longer safe from the consequences of war. Chapter 6. The end of war and economic transformation. When World War II ended, the world faced a new economic reality. Europe lay devastated. Factories were ruined. Millions were unemployed or displaced. Yet total economies had also proven something remarkable. Governments could coordinate massive production, manage labor, and reshape society. This realization led to welfare states economic planning, international institutions like the IMF and World Bank, long-term government involvement in industry and social services. The post-war economic boom owed much to wartime organization and innovation. Conclusion. The legacy of total economies. The world wars transformed warfare and economies forever. They demonstrated that modern conflict is not decided by armies alone, but by factories, workers, scientists, and civilians. They blurred the line between military and civilian life. They proved that economic power is as decisive as military strength. The legacy of total economies still shapes our world today, in government policy, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and the understanding that in modern war, entire nations fight together. Subscribe to this channel for high-quality history documentaries, fascinating stories, and epic moments from the past.